thanks again for doing this. Which this is kind of a general question for you. Like, just what is your pitch to voters? Like, why do you deserve to be reelected? Do you think?
Well, listen, the majority of my career has been spent, congressional career has been spent dealing with COVID-19. And there's no state like ours that was ground zero for the potential economic devastation, but also now ground zero for all of the economic opportunity out of the bipartisan bills that we've been able to pass, including the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, and now, of course, the Inflation Reduction Act. I think that people in Congressional District 3 are craving a pragmatic type of leader who's not afraid to roll up her sleeves to reach across the aisle and work on tough issues and deliver results. That's exactly what I've done. It's not just what I've done as a member of Congress, but it's what I did for 25 years prior to running for Congress. I've been ranked as the 10th most bipartisan member of Congress, the most bipartisan member of Nevada's congressional delegation. And, we've been able to deliver results. And Nevada had 34% unemployment rate 2 years ago, and now it's under 5. And we've seen our major economic driver in industry, gaming, have year after or month after month record revenue. And not to mention where Nevada's positioned right now with close to $3 billion in incoming investment out of the Inflation Reduction Act for climate change and renewable energy. So we have a lot to look forward to. And I think that, Democrats have delivered time and again for Nevada families.
You mentioned your pragmatism. You're a member of the Problem Solvers Caucus. The and the Are you worried about the progressive left of the party and how they're kind of moving a little further to the left? And do you see that being a problem for you when you're trying to legislate, when you're trying to work across the aisle?
Honestly, I'm more worried about the right shift of the Republican Party, especially when you talk about, first and foremost, the largest caucus in the Democratic caucus is the New Dems caucus, which are, moderate business minded Democrats. And so, but what we've seen time and again across this country is that I think out of the 11 Republican members who many of represent parts of, but most of them are on the Problem Solvers Caucus, either retired or were defeated. That worries me because I do value that ability to work across the aisle. And I do worry about the extremism on the right. And, that's exactly what I'm running against. I mean, April Becker has yet to publicly recognize Joe Biden as our duly elected president. I find it interesting that she led the Stop the Steal movement after the 2020 election. Yet when she won in the primary, we didn't hear a peep about her from her. And so, the strength of our democracy is our ability to have a peaceful transfer of power. And I think that Americans need to be and Nevadans need to elect people that honor that. And so, the extreme movement is really what worries me in this country.
But you've also not been afraid to stand up to your leadership. She sometimes takes a position to favoring the progressives. Could you talk a little bit about how that's affected how you've done your job?
Well, listen, first and foremost, what people don't really get to see is a lot of the negotiations that go on behind the scenes to keep ideas from being acted on. And that's really where a lot of our wins have gone. But, let's just talk about the infrastructure package. I was part of the bipartisan group that met in April back in Maryland, April 2021, when that package, which hasn't been voted on for decades, We haven't made any progress, looked like it was in peril.
Yeah.
And we sat down and had the tough conversation of, basically breaking out the infrastructure portion of that package and building that framework. And that was, one of our biggest wins in Congress. And it wasn't a popular um, position to take. People wanted a bigger package, but we just knew that if in order for us to get something done in a bipartisan manner, that was the way we were going to go. And, interestingly enough, Democrats got our act together and now produced the Inflation Reduction Act, which is the largest investment in climate change in history. And not to mention delivers on a promise of Medicare negotiating prescription drug prices and capping Medicare recipients' out-of-pocket expenses, on top of extending the ACA subsidies that really have been so instrumental to close to 90,000 Nevadans.
And just lastly, I've been listening to you testify a lot and talk in your hearings and stuff like that. And you mentioned a couple of times how when you were a kid, your dad was laid off. And I'm just curious. I know that was a big event in your life, and how that kind of colors how you do your job as a lawmaker.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think that first and foremost, everyone needs security and economic security, and a loss of a job is the most disruptive thing to a family. And so, as a lawmaker, protecting jobs and creating jobs is my number, and making sure that we're preparing our workforce for the jobs of the future is a top priority. And also making sure that we're allowing, and I say how my parents struggled with healthcare and almost lost their home because they didn't qualify, just because of pre-existing conditions. And so that's been incredibly important. I was elected in 2018 on a promise that we were going to continue to make healthcare more affordable and protect the Affordable Care Act, and which we have done. We have held back multiple attempts. And now, as we know, prescription drugs have been bankrupted families. It's been a major source of struggle for so many families, and we've been able to deliver on that as well.
Great. All right, Sean.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up economic security. We're going to be digging into some different issue questions, but obviously what's top of mind for voters is the economy. And you were a part of a group that passed several very large federal COVID relief bills. We saw trillions of dollars infused into the economy, billions in our state of Nevada. But some economists have raised concerns that also contributed to inflation. So do you think that trade-off was worth it? Do you think some of those bills could have been scaled back?
Well, first and foremost, I always say that Nevada, it was ground zero for our approach. This was unprecedented, worldwide pandemic, one that we have never experienced in our lifetime. And we were faced with the decision and with the choice to make investments to protect jobs. 2 years ago, the unemployment rate in the state was 34%. Today, it is less than 5%. 2 years ago, you walked down the Las Vegas Strip and it was shuttered, which has never happened before in the history of Vegas. And now we have seen our major economic driver have year after year or month after month record revenues. People have jobs. Inflation is a worldwide phenomenon. There's inflation in Italy, there's inflation in Argentina, in the UK, but what we have in America are people that are back to work. And that was our main thrust of the legislation, was making sure that we kept people employed. And, can we second guess legislation? Yes, we certainly can. But I will maintain that what we did was prevent our economy from bottoming out. And more importantly, what we've passed since then with the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, with the CHIPS package, with the Inflation Reduction Act, has shown and really provides so much opportunity from an economic development point of view for our state. And so I think that, and again, I'll remind you, Republicans like to say that Democrats caused inflation, but let's talk about who's actually taken action on inflation and what Republicans have done. Okay, we passed a bill to take on big oil price gouging. How many Republicans voted for that? Zero. We passed the Inflation Reduction Act, which is allowing Medicare to negotiate prescription drug prices. No Republicans. Even remember when we had the issue with the formula, we didn't get Republican support on that. The lower food and fuel cost bill, I think we got like 5 Republicans. So time and again, Democrats have taken action to fight inflation and bring costs down, and Republicans want to use inflation as a political talking point. And that's the choice that voters are going to have. My opponent likes to bring this up, yet I have not heard one idea from her on how she would address rising costs. And by the way, for the record, we're seeing gas prices go down. We're seeing commodity prices go down and inflation start to taper off. We know that inflation, when you see a disruption in worldwide supply chains for 6 months, not to mention what's happened in Ukraine, with passing the CHIPS Act and passing the Inflation Reduction Act, we're bringing manufacturing to America. We're opening up American supply chain, and we're increasing our energy independence. All of that will have an impact on inflation for Americans.
Yeah, there's certainly some longer term investments with some of those packages, but even with gas prices coming down, they're still significantly higher than they were a year ago. And
I want to remind you, not one Republican, not one, voted for our bill to take on price gouging by big oil companies who have had record profits in a time when Americans have been hurting at the pump.
Keeping in mind, though, that Democrats are in power just, as this is happening, as people are being priced out of affording housing, or, groceries are becoming more expensive. How do you think that's going to weigh on voters' minds in November, even accounting for some of the legislation that's been going on?
Listen, Americans have been through 2.5 years of incredible economic disruption and uncertainty. And I would say that they need to remember who stood up for families first, who passed bills to get vaccines in the arms of Americans, to get our kids back into their seats in schools, and who continue to pass legislation to deal with the impact of the disruption in our supply chain. It is Democrats, and every step of the way, Republicans have obstructed any progress. And that's the choice that our voters will have, that I have been working and fighting to bring down costs. And I am running against an opponent who has not one idea on what she would do to address those issues, but likes to bring it up as a talking point. And her leadership has made it clear that they really have no interest in solving this problem, because they want to use it and put politics over people. And that's really what's on the line in November.
Speaking of the kind of politicking around the economy and some of the labels that are thrown out, we've seen a lot of Republicans saying that, oh, we've had 2 straight quarters of negative GDP growth. We're now in a recession. Do you believe we're in a recession?
Listen, there are economists that do not say we're in a recession, and Republicans, again, like to use fear because they have no solutions. And they want to use this as a talking point, but time and again, we have delivered. I will remind you again, we passed the Competes and the CHIPS Act, which will bring back semiconductor production into our country. It'll open up Made in America manufacturing. It will address the supply chain problems that were inflated or exacerbated because of the pandemic. And we have gotten little or no Republican support on this. And the Inflation Reduction Act, which, by the way, is a major investment in economy in our state, $2.7 billion of investment in large scale clean energy development and storage to our state through 2030, not to mention the tax incentives that it will have to bring down costs for American families to make the conversion to energy, which will then continue to save them close to $1,000 a year in energy costs. So we've taken the direct action, and Republicans continue to use scare tactics, which is what they've done. And that's what the difference is between me and my opponent, that I've rolled up my sleeves, I've done the tough work, and she wants to use scare tactics, but has not one idea on how she would solve this problem for Nevada's families.
Certainly, with this legislation passed, it will still take time for inflation to ease. There are supply chain issues, like you mentioned, global issues that still must resolve. There was even, I believe, a budget model estimate from the Wharton School that estimated the Inflation Reduction Act would have a statistically indistinguishable effect on inflation. Now, that's just one piece of legislation, but if you are reelected, are you looking to do more to address inflation? Is there more that you would do to address inflation?
Well, listen, I mean, every piece of legislation takes time. And this is a major transfer. This is the largest investment in climate change in history. We are making a major investment in how we produce and receive energy, and it will take time. Fortunately for the state of Nevada, we've positioned ourselves to be a major beneficiary of this type of change. I'm going to continue to focus on producing jobs, making sure that we have the workforce development we need so that we're creating the workforce of the future. And, not to mention, but just with the CHIPS Act alone, one of the most significant investments in research and development in this country's history. All of these are investments to make our economy more resilient, to bring manufacturing back to the United States, and to protect and create jobs here in our country. And we'll continue to work on anything we can to bring down the cost for American people. And again, I'll remind you that not one Republican voted to help American families struggling with prescription drug prices, helping American families save close to $2,000 a year in healthcare healthcare costs, and help them with all sorts of tax incentives to make the change to renewable energy that will also save them money in energy costs in the future.
Across this legislation, a lot of the job creation is happening with higher skilled jobs that are, probably a lot better paying than the average job. But, really the people who are feeling the brunt of this economic, the inflation are low wage workers, people who do not make a lot of money. What do you think is a fair federal minimum wage in today's economic climate?
Listen, I think a fair wage is a wage where people can afford housing, can afford healthcare, can afford childcare. And, if you say things I need to continue to work on, it's continuing to work on housing affordability, continuing to work on childcare affordability, continuing to bring down costs for working families. And, one thing I will say that I've been a leader in legislation for workforce development. Again, we passed the Workforce Investment Act, WIOA, including a sector partnership bill of mine, which will bring in anywhere from $6 to $11 million into our state to allow for sector partnerships for workforce development for those types of jobs of the future that are geared towards exactly the type of worker you're talking about. And so, again, I will say that I am about producing results that have a meaningful impact on jobs in Nevada, on us training our workforce for those jobs.
We'll tip it back to Humberto for some questions on education.
That's right. Just a few education questions here. Let's go with the parochial issue. Right in Clark County, the school district is struggling with some serious staffing issues, teacher shortages, bus driver shortages. Are these problems you think Congress could or should be addressing? And if so, what can the federal government do to help out?
Well, first of all, the federal government has helped our state with close to $4 billion in funding that, has gone through for teacher retention and teacher recruitment in the state. And that's already been used. But I think we have obviously an issue with what we pay teachers and how we respect teachers teaching as a profession. Again, the federal government can provide resources to our state, but really a lot of the policy around teacher pay and teacher support is a state issue. But I think we could do things where we incentivize people with student loan repayment. We incentivize people with, even tax incentives. But most importantly, I think this country needs a culture change and how we respect and support our educators across the board.
And you mentioned the billions of dollars that the education system got in Nevada. Do you think that money is going to dry up and at some point, leave a hole in the budget? And do you think that there should be more funding for education from the federal government?
Well, first of all, I think that our state traditionally has vastly underfunded education. And as you know, public K to 12 education is primarily funded at a state level. And I think that what we've been able to do with the American Rescue Plan money was really get our schools open, which was enormous. And I think that it falls on all of us to continue to support education, not just K to 12, but higher ed, and gear towards those sectors of the economy that we need. I mean, we have a nursing shortage, we have a doctor shortage, we have a teacher shortage. Are there incentives that I always say there's incentives, and are there incentives that we can put into place to encourage people to go into those professions? Absolutely. And should we look at them? Absolutely.
And on school choice, your opponent has been a major supporter of school choice as a way of improving education. Do you think this is a viable solution for education in Nevada?
I think that we need to focus on how we invest in public education. And I think that all children should have the choice to an excellent school in their neighborhood. And that's where, I think that making sure we're making those investments in public education and not sacrificing any neighborhood or any group of children is really my ultimate goal. And as you know, my background has been in wraparound services for schools. I've introduced the Community Serving Schools Act, which will extend these types of services. And I think we need to continue to focus that all kids have access to quality education.
Thank you, Sean.
Yeah, before digging into some environment questions, I want to circle back. You mentioned student loan forgiveness as an option for teachers. Obviously, we're still in the midst of a moratorium on federal student loan payments. Do you think Congress or the administration should be doing more in terms of suspending payments, in terms of forgiving student loans?
I think that our higher education system and our loan system is in drastic need of reform. And I believe that there are ways you can do targeted we have a loan, a public service loan forgiveness program to encourage people to go into certain types of careers to provide them with loan relief. I've always maintained that we've seen an incredible increase in the cost of higher ed. We've seen a lack of transparency in what people are buying with their higher ed dollars, and incredible confusion in the higher ed space. I've been a supporter of increasing the Pell Grant, and I'm a supporter of making sure we reform our higher ed financing system. Do I believe in blanket across the board student loan forgiveness? I do not believe in that. I believe that we need to reform our higher ed financing system, and it is a morass. I will say that we need to be more transparent, so that states need to invest more in higher ed. What we've seen is a divestment from states in higher ed, which has led to private citizens funding it. And I'd like to see more transparency around what your education dollar gets you. I want to know when students are take out a loan for an education system or a school, that they understand what their chances of graduating in 4 to 6 years are, what their student loan debt total would be, and what they're expected to earn, and what the default rate is for students that have attended those schools. That information should be publicly and readily available to students, and one that will allow them to make more informed choices.
One follow-up on that. Would you like to see Nevada investing more in higher education?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that, we talk about diversifying our economy. I've talked about it for 30 years since I've been here. Our booms are higher and our busts are lower because we rely, and I mean, COVID was a prime example, because we rely on one industry for the majority, not only of our revenues, but our state revenues. And we need to diversify our economy. And any economic development person will tell you one of the main barriers for companies moving here is our education system. So if you want to invest in economic development, you better invest in education. I'm really proud of the CHIPS Act and a provision that I fought for, which will open up research and development dollars. Will reserve 20% of research and development dollars from the National Science Foundation to more underrepresented states like Nevada. That's important. That's important research dollars that we need in our state. So absolutely, I think we need more investment in higher ed and K-12.
I want to shift gears a little bit to the environment, and I know you've touched on this a little bit already, but between the infrastructure package, between the Inflation Reduction Act, we've seen billions of dollars going toward water infrastructure, addressing drought issues, especially in the Southwest. But even just this week, we saw Lake Mead set to enter another year shortage in 2023. Do you think Congress should be doing more? What should Congress be doing more to address the drought?
First of all, I think collectively we all need to be doing more. I mean, we are in a crisis scenario, and we've known that, we have the longest drought in 12 centuries, or mega drought in the Southwest. The $4 billion that we included in the Inflation Reduction Act is important, because it incentivizes water conservation, it incentivizes agriculture use to maybe go to less water intensive crops, or even fallow out their fields. It also makes investments in water conservation. I was proud to include in this bill, not just in this bill, in the Investment Act, Infrastructure Act, my large scale water recycling bill, which is $1 billion to a type of project that will recycle water in LA. It's a partnership between SNWA, Southern Nevada Water Authority, and LA Metro to recycle water. But yeah, we need to continue to do more. You know, included in this, and not to mention what we did with the drought, the fire and drought resiliency bill as well. $25 million that I secured for SNWA and reclamation to help with the Las Vegas wash. So, you know, these investments and these cuts that we have seen, and I think we can expect more cuts, really are to protect the infrastructure at the dams to make sure we're able to produce the type of electricity that we can. But it's going to require all of us to continue to not just conserve and find alternative sources of water as well.
You know, going beyond just drought and water issues that we have here in the region, you know, obviously with the Inflation Reduction Act, we just had a major investment in climate. You know, how serious of a problem is climate change to you?
I believe it's existential. I mean, we live in the second most warming city in the country, and behind Reno. You know, we have dealt with extreme heat days. We are now on the verge. You know, Lake Mead's the lowest it's been. You know, we're dealing with this mega drought. It's existential, and this is the largest investment in climate change in history. And what this does is encourages people to make that switch to reduce our carbon emissions by 2030. And so I think this is a significant investment. Is it the be all, you know, is it the end? No, it's not the end. We need to continue to make, and by the way, this should be a celebration of United States innovation and leadership in the climate realm. And so I think this is an incredibly important piece of legislation. And was it everything we wanted? No, it wasn't, but it's significant.
You know, I'm sure that there are some folks that might disagree with this, but there is a general consensus that you know, the House is likely to flip control this year. And you know, if we are facing a Republican-led Congress in 2023 and 2024, do you have concerns about a lack of action on climate change under that sort of control?
You know, I personally don't give any energy to Republicans taking control of the House. And so I'm going to continue to make my case to voters on what I've done and what I'll continue to do. And, you know, we're going to continue working on this issue because, you know, I have 2 children, not to mention all the work I do with young people. This is top of mind for young people in this country.
You know, given the investments that were just made with the Inflation Reduction Act, and you know, I know water is a particularly important issue here in Southern Nevada, but just moving forward, do you have any other priorities in terms of climate legislation?
You know, in terms of climate legislation, yeah, I mean, I'd like to see continued investment, obviously, in water, and you know, continue to invest in our conversion to renewable energy. And you know, one thing that, as we know, many of our most underserved communities tend to be the most impacted. And I believe that affordable housing is an issue as well, making sure that people have affordable places to live to keep them safe, especially in cases of extreme heat. So, yeah, we still have a lot of work to do when it comes to climate.
I'll give it over to you, Humberto.
All right, just switching gears again to foreign affairs. Do you agree with the Biden administration's approach to Ukraine? Do you think that's gone so far?
Well, listen, I mean, February 24th, 2022, an unprovoked attack of another sovereign nation. I think every country in the world should stand up straight and be alarmed. And I do believe that there was a choice that the United States had where we could have unilaterally gone in to support Ukraine. And I believe that the president's approach allowed us to expand NATO. We have now seen the addition of Sweden and Finland, and allowed us to build a multinational coalition with the largest amount of sanctions on Russia. And, I mean, I think that Russia, you saw today, I think there was a report in the New York Times that their intelligence was telling them they were going to take Kyiv within the first couple weeks, and they have yet to do that. And so we still have ways to go. And, I was proud to support the $40 billion in humanitarian and defense investment in Ukraine. But we should not keep we should keep our eye on the ball when it comes to this war. And I think that we've already seen incredible disruption across the world, but nothing would be more disruptive than if Ukraine lost this war. And I think the administration has taken the right approach. And by the way, there is bipartisan support for that approach.
Yep. And I guess, is there a concern that it could escalate or drag on and possibly involve troops on the ground? Is there U.S. troops?
I mean, it's always we're always going to be concerned about that. I don't think there's any appetite to send U.S. troops there, but it is dragging on, and we're doing everything we can to support Ukraine so they can win this war. And we'll obviously assess our options as they come, but the main option being keeping our men and women off the ground there.
And Speaker Pelosi went to Taiwan recently, and that was a big deal to do. I just wanted to get your thinking on that.
Listen, I mean, I think that China, and first of all, Taiwan is incredibly important. It's important to our country. That's why the CHIPS Act was so important. I mean, in the 90s, 3 out of 10 microchips were produced in the United States. Now 1 out of 10 is, and Taiwan's a key supplier of the United States. I think that the speaker went to Taiwan despite the threats by China. And I believe it's an incredibly volatile part of the world, and we need to continue to make major investments. I'm on the MilCon-BA subcommittee, major investments in our Indochina region, in our bases there, and make sure that I'm dismayed at President Xi's decision to escalate this. But let's be clear. We have communicated clearly to China that we have no interest in provoking a crisis, but also that we're not going to back down and be bullied by them. And I think that's an important message for China to hear.
Do you think it was wise for the speaker to go, or do you think it was needless provocation?
I think that she's received bipartisan support from Congress, and I think that we will not be intimidated by China. And, I don't think we want to provoke a war, but we're not going to be intimidated.
And lastly, on this topic, it's been a year since the withdrawal from Afghanistan, and I was curious to hear your opinion on how that withdrawal was handled.
Well, first and foremost, the withdrawal was the decision of the Trump administration, who set a deadline. And the Biden administration was, left with actually implementing that. And I think we'll all agree that we wanted the United States out of Afghanistan. I think it wasn't, obviously there were major blunders in the withdrawal, but ultimately the American people did not want troops on the ground in Afghanistan.
I guess. All right, I'll take that. Major blunders. All right, Sean, go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you one question on abortion, and I know your position on this is very clear, and I know we've asked you a lot of questions on this already. But just because I think there has been conflicting messaging from what you're saying about your own position, what your opponent has said, what other Republicans have
There's
said.
nothing conflicting about my position at all.
I
Not
think
one.
just between your messaging and others messaging, not your own position. But I want to just get this clear. Do you support allowing a pregnant person to receive an abortion past 24 weeks if their health or their life is not at risk?
First of all, I voted for the access to the Women's Health Care Protection Act, which reflects the law in the state of Nevada, which allows for an abortion up to 24 weeks and does not allow for one after. That's what I've supported.
So when they say, Republicans say you support abortion up to the moment of birth, you do not support it after 24 weeks. Of course, if we're not talking about the life.
We don't know where April Becker really stands because, first of all, she, basically has said that, she's endorsed by the National Right to Life Committee that wants to ban all abortions with no exceptions. And I've made clear that this is a decision that should stay in the realm of women and their doctors and out of politicians. I support, I've supported what our law is in Nevada. I voted for the Women's Health Protection Act. And, she is basically trying to say, use a scare tactic because she doesn't want voters to understand where she stands on this issue.
And I do get that is the case, and that's why I want to be clear about where your position is. Let's say a woman is 28 weeks pregnant.
This is my position, and I'm going to be very clear on this, that it is a woman's decision with her doctor, and it should not be in politicians' hands. That's my position.
Understood. Moving on, I know you've come under fire and recently for a report from Business Insider that you were late to disclose certain stock trades, and I see that you had clarified that a bit to Business Insider, but I just wanted to again.
By the way, it was a mistake that I caught, and
that's the clarity I wanted to get on this situation. So, what exactly happened there? You caught a mistake and then reported it?
That first of all, let's be clear. I have never directed a trade as a member. I have never directed a trade. And this is a account that is managed by a manager that I don't know, I've never talked to, I don't direct. And we fill out, as members of Congress are required, to fill out forms on any trades that happen. There was a discrepancy between an annual report and a monthly report. And when we found that discrepancy, we reported it.
Now there's been support for legislation that would require members to hold stocks in a blind trust if they were to hold stocks. Is that something that you support?
I think that, first of all, members should not, I support legislation that bans members from directing trades of stocks. There are many ways you can achieve that. We will see what the options are on the table, but I do not think that any member of Congress, and I've supported this legislation, should be able to directly trade stocks as a member of Congress.
Do you think that should go beyond individual members to senior staff to their spouses, or should that just be left to actual members?
Listen, I mean, there's many options on the table. I think that we should have protections in place, and we do already, which is part of the reporting that you're talking about. But that, people should not be able to use inside information to make a promise, and we should have safe guardrails in place to prevent that from happening. And I support that, and I always have and will.
One last question, I guess, kind of about your holdings. I don't want to get into your personal affairs beyond this, but do you still own shares of Full House Resorts?
As you know, I'm going through a divorce. My husband is the CEO of Full House Resorts. Yes, I mean, he received stock as part of his compensation package. It is in negotiations in my divorce.
Understood. Back to you, Humberto.
Just to follow up, is your account in a blind trust officially, or is it just an arrangement that you have?
Again, I am going through a divorce. Once I get through the divorce, I will be able to personally manage my assets.
In the way that you're doing it now with this
But it would, no,
married?
it's run by a money manager,
Okay,
and
I got you.
who does not take a direct, he gets no instruction from me and never has. He could smack me in the face. I wouldn't know who the person is. Okay. I don't know who this person is. I've never talked to him. We have a letter, which I think we've provided with you, that has laid this out. And if we have it, we'll get the letter from you to you from him that says he has never received a direct instruction from me or Dan on a trade in this account.
But it's not technically a blind trust, just to be clear.
No, it
Okay.
is not a blind trust.
Okay. I just want to ask about the January 6th committee and all of the work they've done. I guess my question to you, I guess, does it make you, I guess, reevaluate anything in terms of how you felt about the riot and how that went down and who's to blame? I guess it was what's your opinion of what they're doing and why it's important? I guess somebody another way to phrase it.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I think there are many levels of this investigation that are incredibly troubling for the American people. Uh, I think that it's been demonstrated that there was some form of orchestration in this becoming an attack on the Capitol, and really with an attempt to overturn the Electoral College count and prevent the peaceful transfer of power. And I think every American should be incredibly concerned about that. And, again, I'm running against a woman who has yet to publicly state that Joe Biden is our duly elected president. I find that incredibly extreme and scary. And so I think that their work has been important. I think America should be paying attention to this and prevent anything like this from happening ever again.
And just in the same vein, what was your thinking, or what were concerns you had when the FBI went into Mar-a-Lago and took out documents that belonged to the American people?
I believe that no one's above the law, and that I don't know enough about the information, so I really can't comment on it. But I think he had. We know that his lawyers had lied to the FBI that this existed, and it was a search that would have been conducted on anyone who was hiding that they had sensitive classified information. I mean, I go to SCIFs and have to keep my phone, and I can't take notes, and I'm prevented from talking about information. I don't know what's in it, so I really can't comment. All I can comment on is, this is information that he shouldn't have had, and they obstructed the search prior, and the FBI had to go retrieve this information because it's important to our national security.
All righty, thank you, man.
Yeah, I want to shift from the former president to the current president. I think there have been a lot of attacks from your opponent, kind of tying you to President Joe Biden and trying to cast that in a negative light. Certainly, he's had a low approval rating for a while now. But he's had we've seen some legislative victories. Obviously, passed a lot of big bills in recent weeks. A year and a half into this presidency, what grade would you give Joe Biden?
Listen, I mean, I think Joe Biden had a challenging plate of circumstances when he was sworn in. We had a worldwide pandemic. We had a president before who, really didn't want to even recognize it. We had to get vaccines into the arms of millions of Americans, get our schools open, and save our businesses. And, I would say that Joe Biden's approval rating to me is a reflection on people are exhausted and uncertain. But I will say, after the past several weeks, with the passage of gun safety legislation, the Investment Act, the PACT Act, which, by the way, let's just talk about Republicans trying to block access to benefits for millions of servicemen and women and veterans, the CHIPS and Science Act, and his leadership on Ukraine. I think was sworn in during an incredibly challenging time. I think he ran on the fact that he was going to be a unifier and deliver bipartisan wins. And I think it's safe to say that he's been able to do that.
If Biden chooses to run for re-election in 2024, would you support him?
First and foremost, I'm concerned about my election in 2022. We'll see who runs. I can't make a statement on that. I think that, like I said, he was sworn into office during very challenging times. He committed to working to bring bipartisan solutions, and I think he's delivered on that. Not to mention, assassinated the ISIS leader. The Violence Against Women's Act, which was not reauthorized under the Trump administration. These are key pieces of legislation that he's been able to steward through Congress. And so, we'll make that decision when we come to it and see who's on the ballot.
All right. Okay, switching gears again, just briefly on immigration. Your Republicans are constantly pounding that there's a crisis at the southern border. Do you think that there's a crisis at the southern border?
I think there's a crisis within our immigration system, and that the strongest form of border security that we could do is comprehensive immigration reform. And I feel that this has been used time and again as a wedge issue. And if I would say a top priority of mine in the next Congress would be for us to implement comprehensive immigration reform. Whether you're talking about our workforce shortages, of course, the major insecurity that our dreamers and our DACA recipients live in day in and day out. We need comprehensive immigration reform, and Congress must deliver on that.
Immigration hasn't been rising according to some polls to a top concern lately. Do you think it'll play a role in this election? Do you think it'll be an animating factor at all?
Again, I just think that I think it's an important issue, and one that, Congress must act on. And I think that, across the board, obviously, I'm all for secure borders. And like I said, I think one of the best things we could do is implement some comprehensive immigration reform, which, by the way, there was a package in 2013, which Boehner did not bring to the floor of the House. One man literally blocked it from passing. And so I do think that we, as members of Congress, it is our duty to get back and get that accomplished.
Just quickly, does your vision of border security, of immigration reform include more border security?
I've never been shy about that. I think that we need to have secure borders, but I think it needs to be part of a comprehensive immigration package.
Okay. You go ahead, Sean.
Just want to, hit on a couple last topics. I know our time is winding down. Over the past couple of years, really, we've seen murders on the rise. We've seen gun violence on the rise. And I know that certainly isn't the full crime picture, but those are murders, especially, are something that have a major impact on how people perceive crime. Obviously, there was the gun legislation recently passed. Do you think Congress has done enough to address this issue? Do you think that you could be doing more?
Listen, I support an assault weapons ban. I think that what we passed in terms of the Safer Communities Act was bringing some common sense legislation that we've been talking about for years. So I think it was a big accomplishment. With respect to investing in public safety, again, we passed the CARES Act at a time when state and local budgets were going to be cut. And in our state in particular, it meant $4 billion. I had a press conference with Joe Lombardo, and he talked about how it saved 3,000 police jobs. Did a Republican vote for that? No, they did not. And so if you ask what we have done to deliver for public safety, again, Democrats have delivered in supporting state and local governments. I think that we have a mental health crisis in this country. I just introduced a bill with my friend Brian Fitzpatrick from Pennsylvania to allow for first responders to have more mental health resources available for them. I think we need to continue to do that, support that type of legislation. I have another bill, Invest to Protect Act, which will allow for JAG grant money to be used for smaller police departments. So I've been very out in the front in making sure that the federal government is getting resources to support local and state governments to help with their public safety.
And one last topic, on housing, certainly there's a housing crisis in Nevada, and it's something that has only worsened, since the onset of the pandemic. Even just recently thinking about Nevada, I know we saw a congressional report basically highlighting how major landlords, including Siegel, didn't follow the national eviction moratorium. They weren't distributing rental assistance. I know you mentioned affordable housing earlier, but solutions to the housing crisis look like for Nevada?
Well, we need to build more affordable housing. Number one. I mean, we have an 80,000 unit deficit in terms of affordable housing for our most at-risk families, and it's an all-of-government approach. Certainly, from the federal level, we can provide tax incentives and rebates and guidance in terms of making sure that we eliminate some of the barriers, red tape to get affordable housing built. Obviously provide the support. We've provided with the American Rescue Plan. The governor has announced a $500 million Home Needs and Means Nevada initiative, which will invest in the building and support. We need to allow funding to retrofit older homes so people can stay in those homes, which some of the the Inflation Reduction Act will. But we also need, to make sure that we're instituting land development policy, and that our state and local governments are breaking down some of the barriers in terms of licensing and time to build, et cetera. I had a roundtable the other day with the Urban Land Institute with members of nonprofits, market price developers, and low income housing developers, people from development of state and local governments. And we need to continue to take a whole of government approach to break down those barriers that are preventing some of these developments from coming online in a timely manner at a relatively affordable cost as well. So yeah, we have big challenges ahead, but it's something that I think when we all come together, we can solve this problem.
Thank you. Any last questions from you, Humberto?
I just got one that I forgot to ask, and it's a kind of an easy one, and you may know, you may not know. Do you think that the Latino voter there's an erosion in Democratic support like we've seen in other parts of the country?
Listen, I think that any constituency in our community is who I'm concerned with, and that we need to never take anyone for granted, and we need to have the conversations with each other, and that they need to understand where we've delivered and what we plan to do. And one thing I do want to acknowledge before we end is I've been willing to have those conversations with voters time and again. Obviously, having this interview, I've accepted the debate from KNPR. Becker has not. KLAS has asked me to debate. I'm willing to debate. We have not yet to hear from Becker. And so, if you want the honor of representing voters, and it doesn't matter if you're Latino, AAPI, Black, white, senior, young, you need to let them know where you stand on the issues. And so that's why I believe that it's important to have this type of conversation, and it's important to have debates. And I'm sadly disappointed that April Becker is not willing to respect the voters in the manner that they should be respected, by giving them the time and allowing them to understand where she really stands on the issues that affect their lives.
I had just one follow-up on that. I mean, I know she indicated in a tweet once that she was willing to debate you, but have you gotten any sort of
It was
term?
a sham.
Sorry, what was it?
It was a sham.
So
There have been 2 offers. I challenged her to a debate. We got an offer from KNPR. She missed the deadline in responding despite outreach from KNPR. KLAS is waiting for her to respond.
Gotcha. Thanks for letting us know.
Yeah, do you have any last thoughts? That was really informative and good, and thank you so much for doing it.
No, it's great to chat with you both, and thank you for taking the time. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much, ma'am.
Thank you, Congresswoman.
All right, have a good one.
You too.
Thank you.
Bye.
Have a good weekend.